Um, yeah, let me just get started here and see if I can get this to work properly. So first, just a little background on myself. I currently hold a commercial glider pilot's license and have actually used it as a commercial pilot in Michigan. I worked for a glider school in Adrian, Michigan, gave demonstration rides and also flew 3 air shows and got reimbursed financially for that. My goal is to become a certified glider instructor by this summer. I do have my Silver Sea badge. My first flight was in July 27, 1969, age 16 in Germany. We used winch tow at that time. My total flight time in gliders is 264 hours, in single engine 64 hours. And my single engine is not a private, it's still on a student license. I have 2 successful solo static cord parachute jumps, and I did those in preparation for flying in competition and doing aerobatics. Figured it'd be a good idea just to go through the training so I know what to do when I have to use it. I was a former member of Untitled Segelflugverein in Münster, Westfalen, Deutschland, because that's where I started. And I was also a former member of Adrian Soaring Club in Adrian, Michigan, operations director of the Adrian Soaring Club for 2 years. I was also operations director of the 1974 U.S. National Soaring Championships that were held in Adrian, Michigan. And I was also a former member of Central Indiana Soaring Society back when it was at what was called Terry Airport. I did place first in my first 2-day soaring contest, and I'm going to be joining Soar Indy this spring. So that's a little bit about me. And in flying gliders, what is the goal? And different people have different opinions as to why they want to fly gliders. So I'm going to open it up to the group. Any volunteer as to why you want to fly gliders?
Enjoy the freedom of flying.
Okay. Anybody else?
Soaring with eagles.
Okay. And what is the goal of thermaling?
Stay up.
Exactly.
As long as you can.
Get high and stay high. Now, obviously, thermals are not really represented in real life like you see here in this picture. This is typically what you might find in a simulator. So what we need to do is we need to visualize where those thermals are. And there are a lot of telltale signs. Some of them might be birds that are soaring, could be other gliders flying. It could be debris that got pulled up by thermal. Here in Indiana, sometimes I've flown around corn leaves, not the whole stalk, but just the leaves, and debris from fires. A fire itself could be a sign because there'd be a heat source. And then, of course, the other typical sources coming up in another slide are dark areas on the ground. Now, we also need to find thermals when there are no clouds, sometimes referred to as severe clear. And then how are thermals formed? As you see here in the image, it could come off of the heat of a city. It could come off of a plowed field. It could come off of a parking lot. There would be a lot of different options and sources for thermals. And the formation of convective air currents is what creates thermals. You have warm rising air. The rising air cools and descends back to the ground, and then it finds another place where it goes back up again. And we as a glider pilot hop and skip from one thermal to the next, either staying local or even going cross country. And thermal sources, again, are the plowed fields. That's a good source. A town, a village, asphalt, typically lakes and marshes, cold areas on the ground are not good thermal sources. Those are ones where we're going to find our sink. And we either need to avoid those or fly through those quickly to get to the next place. And if I remember, there are not too many lakes around Alexandria right now, unless we have a strong rain or something. And some people like to soar local, and later on they also like to soar cross country, and then we use the thermals and the clouds as our tool to get from one place to the next. And that's where it's important to know how to find a thermal and to work the thermal to one's efficiency. So cross country soaring, going out and back, and I've done that several times myself. Sometimes I made it back to the airport and sometimes I didn't. And I was fortunate so far, every one of my off-field landings that I've had, which is quite a few, I have been able to get towed back by aero tow and not by trailer. And of course, if there's cross-country soaring involved in most contests. And that is also another good reason to know how to find good thermals and stay in the thermals. In fact, this right here in this picture looks like it's a blue dry day unless it's going to change later in the afternoon. And there are typically two common types of thermals. What most people know about is the column thermal, and then also there's a bubble thermal, where it's just a bubble of air that gets released off the ground. So some glider pilots might be fortunate enough to find that bubble and stay in it, and other glider pilots who are flying right underneath them are not finding it at all. So the column thermal is easier to follow somebody else and stay in it and have telltale signs such as other birds that are doing the same thing. And this is how I explain it to lay people. If someone walks down an up escalator slower than the rate at which the escalator is going up, then that person will actually wind up going up. So if a glider glides down a mass of an up air mass, which is a thermal, slower than the rate at which the air mass or the thermal is going up, then that glider will wind up going up. And I find by using this explanation, most lay people get an understanding of how it works. And I also explain to them, if you ever see a hawk or any bird just soaring and appearing to get higher and higher, it is in a thermal. It is thermaling, as long as it's not flapping its wings. Or it could just be magic. That could be the other explanation for it too. And then what creates thermals? Obviously, it's the sun. The sun heats the ground and objects that are on the Earth's surface. Dark objects such as dark fields, parking lots, buildings, etc., absorb the sun's radiant heat. So there'll be a hot spot on the ground that creates the lift and very often turns into cumulus cloud, which is a good sign of a thermal. Later in the day, usually around noon, those objects will release the heat into a rising column of warm air or as a massive bubble of air. And what creates the thermals, if the rising column of warm air or bubble of air has sufficient moisture in it, it'll turn into a cloud at an altitude cold enough to condense that moisture, and then it turns into a cloud, which is a good telltale sign. The resulting cloud is a visual cue that there may be a thermal within which a glider can gain altitude. Now, not every cloud is a cloud underneath which you could have a thermal, because some clouds may also be dissipating or may not be strong enough. And don't want to get into all the physics in a lot of detail here, but when the temperature and the dew point come together, that's where the condensation level is, and that's the base of the cloud. And what I typically look for is a cloud that has a dark underside, because that means there's an updraft going in there. It's dark because the sun doesn't get in there that easily. So that's a good telltale sign that a cloud is a good thermal type of cloud. And when there isn't sufficient moisture, the thermal will still be there. It's just not turning into a visible cloud. Some people call it a blue or a dry thermal. And then you still need to fly around to find it. It's just a little more difficult. And I found that certain types of sunglasses actually help catch some of that invisible moisture. And when thermal clouds line up, it's called a thermal street or a cloud street. And this makes it kind of fun to fly cross country without having to stop and circle quite so often. Sometimes you can just fly in a straight line, gain altitude under the thermal cloud, lose a little altitude between clouds, and then gain altitude again on the next one. And if need be, then you can also stop in thermal under a strong one to get all the way up to cloud base. So cloud streets are great for flying cross country. And this picture is kind of interesting because we have a real street and a couple of cloud streets. And this is another visual representation of cloud streets. And getting into all the physics of how this happened would be a whole nother presentation. We'd be here all afternoon. Like I said earlier, there are a lot of subcategories to thermaling. Here's a view from above of some really cool cloud streets. Unfortunately, as a glider pilot, we typically don't get to see this kind of view unless we get towed up above the clouds. And if the winds aren't too strong, cloud streets can also be used for an out and return flight. So you can use them to fly out and also fly back. So it all depends on how much wind you have and how strong the clouds are and what your proficiency is to make it back. And then you kind of play follow the leader if you got somebody else that's involved there. I just read an article that Australians are very proud about not following somebody else. They all want to do their own thing. And very often they wind up landing off field because of that, because they're not willing to follow somebody else who might have a little more experience than they do. So let's get into the thermal itself. Now's the time to get high. And this is another topic that could be an hour long, how to get into, how to center into a thermal. Typically, a thermal will have a major updraft towards the middle and possibly even a downdraft along the edges. So you could, in fact, experience your wing hitting the edge of the thermal going down, and you might think that it's your right wing going up. So it's a matter of looking and reading the sky. If I see there's a cloud to the left and my wing goes down, I'm going to turn into that because I'm thinking that's the outer edge of the downdraft of the thermal, and then pull into it and start circling and centering to get high. And there's a lot of different theories on whether you should aim for the center of the cloud, the edge of the cloud, different types of reversal turns, some of which can lose altitude, some get you out of place. It's kind of like if you do a U-turn with a car, you are going 180 degrees, but you're not 180 degrees on the same path that you started the turn at. So there's different things to look at there, and that's a whole nother lecture. And I've been going through a lot of different books, from some Tom had lent me and some that I own. And I'll have references on these towards the end of my presentation also. And here's another one talking about a lot of different situations, getting into the center of a thermal, and the speeds to fly is another topic. The angle of your bank is another topic. How much of a bank you should have. A lot of it depends on the diameter of the thermal, how big it is, how strong it is. So there's a lot of different variables. So I didn't want to make this a 2-hour presentation. And as you can see here, the glider may make a lot of different adjustments in the thermal, because the thermal itself may have a different diameter up closer to the cloud than it has close to the ground. So there is some adjusting that has to be done for that reason. And you may have picked up a thermal that may also be in the process, maybe not getting much stronger. It's just going to be what it is, and then start dissipating too. And this is, if you look closely, you can see a lot of gliders there, and that's everybody getting into thermal. And then of course there are federal aviation rules and SSA rules as to how to enter a thermal. Typically, you fly into the thermal and circle in the direction that everybody else is flying, so that you don't have mid-air collisions. The one thing, of course, that you also want to look at is a thermal source and the resulting cloud are not always vertical. If you have zero wind, then this situation, this image could be possible, where the thermals are going straight up. If you have a little bit of wind, then the bubble thermal on the left or the column thermal on the right may be slightly shifted away from the actual source of the thermal. So a lot of people look at the ground and see a dark field and they fly directly over it and not find a thermal. What they need to realize, it's a little bit downwind from the source. So location of the thermal relative to the ground is important. It's also based on wind speed. So in the picture on the left, we have a fairly little bit of wind, and on the right, the winds are actually increasing as we go further into altitude. So that could affect where you're going to be looking for the thermal. And then this topic is one of my topics that I also use in my sales training. Your attitude determines your altitude. And I want to just take a minute talking about this, because in the years I've been flying gliders, since age 16, 17, I've experienced a lot of pilots who do not even want to bother pulling their glider out of the hangar if the conditions aren't really great. And my attitude was, I'm going to fly if it's legal to fly. And I wound up staying up for half an hour. The guys would come down in 5 minutes or not even bother taking off. And having that kind of experience of learning how to hang on to 50 feet per minute lift or less, may be one of the reasons that I won my first contest, because I was flying it was a Schweitzer 123 at the time, and I was competing with other fiberglass ships, and they weren't staying up as long as I was. So flying in all conditions is just good training for all circumstances, whether you're flying in a contest or just for fun. So if your attitude is that you're going to find lift, then you're more likely to find it. If your attitude is, well, I don't think there's anything up there, then obviously you're not going to find it, and your mental capacity will actually defeat you. So your attitude determines your altitude. And this is a more relaxed club type thermaling where there's not 50 other gliders in the air like at contests. What you don't want is this sort of situation where they're all going in different directions and too many gliders all at once. This is another workshop, and Tom had talked a little about this in the previous workshop about glide angles and speed to fly. And I thought this was just a really good graphic that shows that if you fly your minimum sink airspeed, you're going to land at point A. Your best L over D is point B. Penetration D and best glide and sink is going to bring you over to the thermal that you're looking for. So it's already been discussed in another workshop, and in fact, that could be expanded in many different ways, I'm sure. And another future topic would be the thermaling degrees of bank, the diameter of the circle, and the G-forces involved. And there are a multitude of different graphs and charts, and some people have the computers on board and some people do not have computers on board, and they just have to use the seat of their pants to figure it out and make best of what the conditions are. And this is one of the sources that I was using. It's The Art of Thermaling Made Easy by Bob Wander, and that itself could be the book itself could be a weekend workshop because there's just so much and so many different subtopics involved. Another book that I use is the Flight Training Manual for Gliders. It's also what we use for the Mach 1 from Russell Holtz. And then another great source is the Glider Flying Handbook. And you can actually go to the FAA website and download a free PDF if you did not want to buy the book yourself, and just print out the chapters that you're interested in or just read them online. And the chapter that references to soaring techniques and thermaling was chapter 10 out of the FAA's Glider Flying Handbook. And another book that I discovered is one called The Soaring Engine. There's 3 volumes, and volume 1 is about ridge, thermal, and mountain soaring. And what I also didn't get in today, because it's 2 other topics, is thermals near ridges and thermals in the mountains, because those are also a different type of flying, different things to look for. In fact, many years ago, 2-3 years ago, no, it's actually more than that, quite a long time ago, I flew a glider. It was a single place glider, and it was a Pilatus B4, as a matter of fact. And I flew for 2.5 hours and got up to 12,000 feet altitude near Pikes Peak. I flew out of Colorado Springs when Black Forest Glider Port was still right there, close to the mountain. They since have moved further north between Denver and Colorado Springs. So this is another book that'd be worthwhile to check out. And it's available from Wings and Wheels on their website, along with some other good materials. So then what is your goal? Goal is to have fun, to promote the sport, to maybe win some contests, go out and fraternize with other like-minded glider people, sailplane people. And that's what I enjoy, but I don't just enjoy the flying part, I enjoy the camaraderie. Back when I was taking the lessons in Germany, it only cost us $2.50 a month was our membership dues, and then all the flying we can get in. We didn't have to pay for the tow, we didn't have to pay for the time. And sometimes I'd come on a Saturday, sign up, and my turn wasn't until Sunday. And why do we do that? Because it's aviation, we want to be there. So that was part of the fun in the experience. And some of you may have the book, The Joy of Soaring. If you can see it there in the top left-hand corner of the image. And of course, there's other joys to soaring too. So stay positive, test negative. And these are 24 different types of gliders that I have actually flown in the years that I've been involved with sailplanes and gliders. Quite a few different ones. In fact, one was with a drag chute, and it belonged to a friend of mine. He let me fly it. And we discussed when we picked it up from New York State to always be prepared that somehow, some way, the drag chute may not work, because it had spoilers, no dive brakes, just spoilers, and they were very ineffective. And the one flight that he let me fly it, the drag chute didn't work. So I had to force it on the ground and use the nose skid to slow down, and I stopped within about 6 feet of 6 foot tall corn. So it was all good, worked out fine. So I wish you all health, wealth, success, and happiness. Thank you for letting me learn what I learned and show and teach you. And as it says in the top left, always go where I'm told to go.